Hello, this is Barry Shank, junior high teacher from Winona, Minnesota, teaching language arts. And when posed with the question, how do I assess prior knowledge? I wanted to put it in two categories, both my own prior knowledge and that of my students, because my prior knowledge affects what I am able to teach. Secondly, I want to say that I'm glad that this question was asked because I'd like if I could start the conversation at school about assessing prior knowledge in a non-judgmental way. I often find that in our PLCs, when we are sharing how we're scaffolding from year to year, it becomes kind of a competitive, self-destructive time, and that should not be the case. So we should be building on each other's teaching from the year before instead of examining who's doing it better and so on. So I hope that this begins that conversation. Why does prior knowledge matter? I like what Hattie and Yates state in their Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn text. What you already know determines what you can learn and how you think. Learning proceeds quietly and efficiently when what is new builds directly upon what is secured. And this I would relate to the schema or the schematics of how our brain is processing and building. And their book states that it deals with concepts, abstractions, script, or words, and also the big picture. I want to relate prior knowledge to a couple of areas in the human experience, both academic and personal prior experiences. Academic assessment, which I often include, is direct questions in class. I'm a proponent of the direct question as needed, but I have learned through this program how important it is to give the students time to think and access their long-term memory, maybe, and use some of that schematic before answering the questions. I also use writing often as a language arts teacher, particularly, and have a memoir which students use at the beginning of the year and feel I can assess both personal and academic prowess through this memoir as I learn more about how the student talks and how they think through their writing, and then can also check for some of the academic needs and grammar and that sort of thing, the 6 traits+1. I use pre-tests to show areas of mastery or those that I might question. I repeat questions through various tools. Students often work in groups in my classroom so they can build items together and build ideas based on other people's experiences. I often ask students to create presentations which explain a concept. I'm a visual person, so I also like diagrams. I have students give reports and will always offer them the opportunity to share out loud. Being a former speech coach in Canby and being a communications major, I think that the more students can speak out loud, the better they're able to organize the thoughts and hook the long term with the short term explanations. And then, of course, there are formative and summative assessments regularly throughout the school year and used in conjunction with the other language arts teachers. And then if we talk about assessing through life experience, the reason I like to include this is because life experience is probably more of a determiner of how students will receive academic materials. So I will have students talk about their family traditions, about their travel, write and talk about their favorite things or hobbies throughout the year. They get to know you games. Additionally, we will do show and tell and have art projects, which include word art often. And I like to use poetry and poetry slams for expression. And of course, often teaching the concepts and the beauty of poetry and how music is poetry and how lyrics help us remember things. So that taps into the memory side. I wanted to spend a little time talking about the long-term versus short-term memory. I think it's interesting that we rely on long-term memory, that it is the building block, actually, the Lego creation, the Jenga game, or the Lincoln Log memory, which stabilizes the rest of our lives. So it's what our short-term memory is built on. Yet, short-term memory is often how one is judged or assessed by others. And I think as educators, we have to consider the importance of that long-term, behind-the-scenes memory that's going on in a student, especially at the junior high level or the high school level, where the brain is still developing at such a quirky, sporadic rate. So back to the question, why does it matter? Why does prior knowledge matter? It was interesting what De Jong talked about in his article about cognitive load. And I think load is a really good term to use because it weighs on the mind and it drives as a load and it pushes in the cart and we pull these things along. Cognitive load relates working memory with instructional systems. Our working memory, which is also called the short-term memory and includes small amounts of information, is associated with cognition, intelligence, and academic achievement. Now, De Jong didn't include intelligence, but it's what people can recall quickly that people often relate to being intelligent. And I think it's interesting that De Jong breaks those two up so that we can see the importance of each. So in assessing prior knowledge, I think the prior knowledge and letting students know that we're talking about it helps them understand that experiences, both academic and personal, matter, and that they can see the teachers are trying to understand all areas of their lives that they need to help students learn. And to end, I think it's important to realize that there's always room for adapting and expanding how one assesses prior knowledge so that they can make new plans and build on it and build a strong schematic.